even if you want there to be, there is no such thing as neutral. And ultimately, any attempt you make to stay somewhere in the middle will inevitably mean you end up taking a side. There's no way to live in such a way that your inaction is meaningless. So even inaction ends up being an action in one way or another. In the movie, Rick, several times we hear Rick say, "I stick my neck out for nobody." And then Captain Renault says about Rick, he says, "Rick is completely neutral about everything." That's actually a quote from the movie. Even Renault about himself, he says, "I have no conviction. I blow with the wind." Rick, at another point in the movie, says, "I'm not fighting for anything anymore. I'm the only cause I'm interested in." And as I was listening to those quotes come up again and again in the movie on my recent rewatch, I couldn't help but think about the church in Revelation, that God is describes as lukewarm. So this is from Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 to 17 say, and that to me, I mean, when I think of Casablanca, that's what I think of. I think more so even than the love triangle is this attempt at neutrality when the world around you is falling apart. And I guess what is hard for me to understand, um, Rick is such an interesting character. It's hard for me to understand, though, why he even wants neutrality when there is so much on the line. And I think you see it's such a great transformation that we get in Rick from the beginning of the movie to the end. But it's his neutrality, I think, starts out of self-interest and self-preservation. I think we can certainly talk about how much of that is the result of his broken heart, that he doesn't want to put himself out there anymore and risk the possibility of being jilted again, whether it's by a woman or just by the world at large. And so he thinks he has this middle ground that he has found. But I missed this on my rewatch, and I was watching the national anthem scene right before we started recording because I just love it. And what I missed and I had forgotten is that Laszlo goes to the band and tells them to play La Marseillaise, and they don't until the band leader looks at Rick and Rick gives them a nod. And
Gives
that's
him the
when they start
nod.
to play. So even in that, like we do see Rick start to take sides, and it's
Mhm.
like this whole movie is about his, I think, realization, that as much as he wishes there was this non um, inconsequential, I guess, middle ground, that he could just stake his claim in a place where everyone will just leave him alone. I don't want to have anything to do with any of this. The movie really is at least partially about him realizing that that is impossible. Um, Even if he doesn't seek out making a stand, the world is going to come to him, and eventually he's going to have to stand for something. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Neutrality does not exist, and I think from the Christian worldview, we shouldn't want it to exist, right? I think we should be on a side. We serve God,
You
period.
cannot
Um,
serve two masters.
exactly, exactly. And I think because we have a worldview that acknowledges that we are created beings, we know that we are created to worship. So as Christians, we know that we worship God. But if you don't worship God, you have to replace God with something else. You have to replace God with someone else. And so I think for us, that's where we know that neutrality cannot exist when you are creatures
Mhm.
of a creator, who demands your worship. Then you have to serve somebody, and you cannot serve two. So
Yep.
um,
Amen.
I think in pretty much any conflict, there is going to be a right side and a wrong side. And I don't mean to say, like there are obviously places in the Christian life where we have to allow room for nuance. We have to look for
Yeah.
balance
Mhm.
in so many ways as well. So
Mhm.
I'm not talking about those
Yeah.
issues, but just in terms of, we have Rick here living in the midst of a world war
Mhm.
and trying
Pretty
to
bad.
remain neutral through it. And that's not a time for inaction. That is a time for Christian men and women to fight for the right. So that to me is just one of the standout themes, theological themes of this movie.
We hope you enjoyed this snack-sized taste of popcorn theology. Check out the full episode using the link in the description. Subscribe on YouTube for more content. Follow and interact on social media to share with others. And remember, you are not a mindless consumer.